The 90s, a decade remembered by many in the USA as a decade of unprecedented peace. But for me it was a bit different. A decade of economic downfall, 6 years that felt like an eternity, and pop culture madness and escapism swinging full force while mass panic was on the rise. My name is Lynx, and I grew up in Mexico in the 90s.
Canal 5, al servicio de la comunidad.
Add a sombrero though, please.
Happy?
Nice.
Okay, good. Hello internets, welcome back to Checkpoint Reached. Rather than a game review or recommendation, I thought I'd share with you what it was like to grow up in the 90s in Mexico. It shaped a ton of my tastes, for better or worse. Before the internet, culturally speaking, Mexico lagged behind the USA in a few aspects, so my childhood as far as pop culture goes, it was this strange mix of the 80s and 90s. A time of relentless consumerism, through the eyes of a country without money or the means to back up that consumption. Before we get to the meat of this video, I must address some backstory for the events that will unfold in the 90s to contextualize them. As a foreword, the former ruling party in Mexico is known as PRI, and they had almost an entire century of presidency, one term after another, to a point it was called the perfect dictatorship. The PRI party was in its last ruling periods where our story takes place. Our story actually begins before I was even born, in 1982 at the end of the presidency of attorney José López Portillo, leaving the country with yet another economical disaster, with the peso devaluating by 3,100%. Yoy! This will be important throughout this video. In his final speech as president, Portillo actually cried while giving a speech about how he failed the people, the poor, and everybody in a spineless attempt at sympathy. This went down in history as a pathetic act that enraged pretty much the entire population and became the symbol of parodies and mockery. But enraged people or not, the matter of fact was that the economy was screwed. His successor, Miguel de la Madrid, promised to fix the economy, that in these times of emergency, of high debt, lack of income and frail infrastructure, he'd use his term, taking place during the late Reagan presidency and the early Bush senior presidency, to strategically salvage the country. He called this plan the moral renovation of society. And in May 1st, 1984, they attempted to assassinate him with Molotov bombs during a parade. The next year, September 19, 1985, a terrible earthquake shook Mexico City, monumental damage, over 10,000 deaths and unprecedented panic. And just to add insult to injury, 1986 comes. The FIFA World Cup takes place in Mexico, where a good chunk of the population protested, thinking that the World Cup was an unnecessary expense and a convenient smokescreen for people to get distracted by while the economy sinks further. Mexico always had an alleged self-controlled devaluation of the peso with a dedicated budget for it. But with Portillo's nationalization of the bank 3 months before his term ended in crocodile tears, the flawed execution of Madrid's market policies, failure to meet the peso inflation of 100% per year, post-earthquake reconstructions, World Cup expenses, and many other economic plans that were set into motion only to fail miserably, things were looking up Milhouse. However, to Madrid's credit, he was the first president to be market-oriented. There was no presence of this in Mexico, so his successes and failures will become the blueprints for the future. For better or worse. Fellow politicians from Madrid's PRI party defected to other parties. There was a massive political rupture. Within the party, politician Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas will defect and oppose the PRI party in the upcoming 1988 elections, while Madrid had already handpicked his successor Carlos Salinas de Gortari. The 80s was a pretty difficult time for Mexico. Every Mexican was a cog of a large machine that was useless and broken beyond repair. But things couldn't possibly get worse, could they? 1988 elections come. Cárdenas has the majority of the people's support, sick of the PRI's stupid shenanigans. The elections, which are organized and moderated by the government and in no way rigged, were anticipated by the population at large for the first time. The cogs were ready to get rid of this broken machine and become part of a new, working one. And then the lights go out during the counting. Salinas is declared president after recounting votes. Indignation from both within Mexico and the global eye from foreign government agencies was so big that this led to the creation of a new organization not affiliated with the government to handle elections, Federal Electoral Institute, IFE by its Spanish acronym. So Salinas is our head honcho, he's steering the sinking Titanic. What do? Why, remove 3 zeros to the devaluating peso to allegedly make transactions easier. Granted, this did work for a short while, since the new peso created by Salinas forced the dollar price to go down. An artificial way to get rid of the 3100% devaluation that will surely not bite us in the ass. In hindsight, Madrid said the following in 1998.
Lo que más me duele es que esos años de ajuste económico y de cambio estructural, pues se caracterizaron también por un deterioro en la distribución del ingreso, por un abatimiento de los salarios reales y por la insuficiente generación de empleo. En suma, por un deterioro de las condiciones sociales.
I was born in this era, but I didn't have the cognition to comment on it beyond vague memories of learning how to walk and watching Saint Seiya. Because of course a toddler will watch this violent shonen, why not? In the very early 90s I must admit I watched a ton of TV since I didn't have my own video game console yet. This logo right here, Canal 5, Channel 5, is an airwave-based public channel with mostly content for kids and families. Since it was public, you bet everything here was reruns. I grew up watching Garfield and Friends, The Real Ghostbusters, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Thundercats, which is still one of my favorite cartoons, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. It was a good time for children's pop culture, I'd say. Again, I didn't have a game console yet, but I liked watching cartoons, drawing, watching video game commercials and playing with toys. The new peso helped give a small window of stability. This economical stability, however, carried a ton of social unrest that will keep increasing in the following years. The youth of that time, middle schoolers, high schoolers and college students kind of saw Bart Simpson as the anti-establishment icon of the first half of the 90s. The Simpsons debuted in Mexico to great instantaneous success thanks to a great dub and localization work, and Bart's attitude being the protagonist of the very early Simpsons, heavily charged with anti-authoritarian themes, and the show's early political charged cynical worldview took on a whole new level, and I believe it's one of the reasons why the show, despite its diminishing quality, remains popular here. 1994 was a hit show of a year socially though. Just in January of that year, the EZLN, the Zapatista National Liberation Army, emerged from southern Mexico. They interrupted the starting campaign of pre-candidate Luis Donaldo Colosio and declared war on the established government after decades of historical oppression toward the native farmers, now worried that the NAFTA will mean that the government will sell their lands to foreign enterprises with impunity. Many negotiations were done to avoid a civil war from breaking out. The details of this remain murky. There's a ton of he said, she said, that the EZLN did it or that the PRI themselves did it, but the matter of fact is that in 1994, in live TV, Colosio was assassinated.
Yo veo un México con hambre y con sed de justicia. Un México de gente agraviada por las distorsiones que imponen a la ley quienes deberían de servirla.
Salinas had to haphazardly choose a new successor for the 1994 elections. Public Education Secretary Ernesto Zedillo was chosen, and under the perfect dictatorship, naturally, he became the next president. His decision will determine the fate of Mexico. And then the December mistake happened. And it's here where I was at my full cognition as a child and I saw hell unfold. Whoever said children don't realize when things are bad is full of crap, I tell ya what. December 1st, 1994, Salinas ended his administration, and because he refused to devalue the peso again after the increasing power of the dollar, the economy became frail again. Ernesto Zedillo found himself with a country that was greatly indebted after the haphazard replacement of the old peso for the new one. Previous administrations had a devaluation fund in place to keep national-made products cheap and foreign products really expensive. The sandcastle was crumbling, Zedillo had to make a decision. In December 19th, 1994, he had a galaxy brain moment of insight whose four-dimensional logic goes beyond us mere mortals. He decided he'd do nothing and let the peso devaluate naturally.
Muy bien, caracola mágica, ¿qué hacemos ahora?
Nada.
¡Ha hablado la caracola mágica!
¡Ha hablado la caracola mágica!
Inversionists bailed out, there was a stock panic where everyone left. 16 hours later, over $6 million from enterprises, foreign banks and associations left the country, leaving the Mexican market broke. Literally broke. The bank was so broke the peso devaluated so hard it was suddenly worth nothing. Massive layoffs, massive debts beyond acquisition power of anyone, businessmen and unemployed people suddenly having debts so high they began committing suicides. The devaluation that began with Portillo just got worse. It hit us all, no exceptions. People lost homes, lands, everything. I was a child no older than 4. I could do nothing but watch the world burn. So while my parents both worked and I stayed at home with my grandmother, what to do now? Watch TV. 1995 comes and as I said, I was a kindergarten-aged child. I just watched public TV and a ton of my tastes come from watching unsupervised TV in my grandmother's house. Or, to put it bluntly, this is when I became a massive weeb. Perhaps due to the success of Saint Seiya or the demand for escapist media after December Mistake, an event I can only compare to American Great Depression and the rise of comic books, we had a ton of anime imported. The original Dragon Ball, Ghost, Sweeper Mikami, Samurai Pizza Cats, Sailor Moon, The Slayers, Ranma 1/2, Street Fighter 2 movie. This time in the 90s while the economy struggled was when I began watching a ton of anime completely uncensored on TV. Funnily enough, while violent anime was aired during daytime, Ren and Stimpy aired pretty late at night, for a child at least, 9:30 PM I still remember. Oh yeah, around this time I also saw Tazos, Pogs come into existence. The very first series in Mexico was the Looney Tunes version and I still remember the first Tazo I ever had was a Roadrunner one. Tazos still exist, by the way.
Mira, tengo unas fichas súper de Alf. ¿Te acuerdas de Alf? ¡Volvió! ¡En forma de fichas!
There was also the debut of Power Rangers, which I loved right away. The action, the ant robot, the sweet designs. I had already loved Showa era Godzilla thanks to my mom as well as reruns of the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, so Power Rangers was up my alley. The popularity of Power Rangers was pretty high in Mexico in general. McDonald's was still rather accessible and giving Power Rangers figures for Happy Meals during the debut of the movie, and I remember everyone trying to get them all. I did, and God do I wish I knew where those figures are now. Thanks to the wonderful Chinese creation of Famiclones, Nintendo was still a household name in Mexico. Mario was always popular. In November 1990, the fan magazine Club Nintendo became an official sanctioned by Nintendo magazine that lasted until February 2019. And in 1991, during that brief stability window on the Salinas term, the SNES hit big. Big! It's a pop culture icon. People my age will surely fondly remember the good old Super Nintendo. Despite the December Mistake, in 1995 Nintendo Mania debuted on Canal 5's main competition Azteca 7, and if I needed any more reason to wake up early on Saturdays besides childhood hyperactivity, this was it. Hosted by Club Nintendo's head honcho Gus Rodriguez and his son Javier Rodriguez, Nintendo Mania became the other way to see new game announcements and video game tricks and walkthroughs before the age of the internet. The advantage of seeing games in motion, events taking place in Japan such as Shoshinkai/Space World, the birth of E3, all packed in a running time of 20 minutes per episode. I don't even know how my parents managed to, but in Christmas 1995 I finally got my SNES bundled with Donkey Kong Country and I was really happy. You may be wondering, if the economy was so bad, the fighting Ranma 1/2 game, the Sailor Moon beat 'em up, all based on very popular animes of the time, as well as stuff like Mega Man X, Super Castlevania 4 and Final Fight being extremely popular rental games in that time among a ton of Nintendo loving kids. As for Sega, simply our laws did not allow them to insult the competition directly, and a ton of Sega ads rely on that. To elaborate, video game and toy commercials here usually came from the USA and just got dubbed over. Nintendo hadn't relied on insulting Sega much, and then Gus Rodriguez will direct the editing of commercials that do like the Donkey Kong Country one to meet our standards. Nintendo hit, and hit big, but Sonic still had love in cartoons. Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog was relatively popular, and if a kid had a Sega, it still was cool. We didn't know console wars were a thing. Yet. Canal 5 was hitting strong, but the pop culture wasn't entirely Japan-centric either. Reruns of the Back to the Future trilogy, Tim Burton's Batman duology, the Terminator movies, Karate Kid trilogy, Jurassic Park, Conan the Barbarian, Ghostbusters, Commando, Predator, the Rocky movies, the Star Wars original trilogy, RoboCop. Yup, all of this I watched when I was a kid on Saturday afternoons, and this is what I mean when I say that although I didn't live through the actual 80s, my childhood did feel like the 80s to an extent. 1996 comes around, PS1 was out and the N64 was being hyped by Nintendo Mania, but honestly, no one except the kids that were in a better situation were excited for it. There was no rush to replace the SNES, I'd say its popularity here lasted up until 1998 when mod chips to play bootleg CDs on PS1 became widespread. 1995-1996, in some regions cable TV becomes affordable, even if it's an extremely basic plan especially compared to now. And then I watched other childhood favorites of mine. The debut of the Wata cartoon show where I saw the first pilot of Dexter's Lab, Nickelodeon where I watched Rocko's Modern Life, another personal favorite of mine, and I saw the cartoons happen, and while I was already a massive weeb, I made no distinction. Cartoons were cartoons, no matter the origin to me, and I loved them. As a side note, perhaps because I live in northern Mexico, I had the American Cartoon Network and Fox Family channels, so I feel rather nostalgic for those channels as well. The economy finally became somewhat stable by the end of the 90s through Cedillo's desperate work to salvage anything resembling a country. The shadow of the December mistake still creeps over our society to this very day though. However, the uncensored distribution of anime starts to die off due to a bunch of reasons I won't cover here, but the last animes we had directly from Japan without prior American tampering or censorship were Digimon Adventure, Adventure 02, Tamers, Frontier and Shaman King. After Shaman King, never again did I see this logo at the end credits of an anime. The turn of the millennium is approaching. My family gets a cheap Windows 98 PC with 3GB hard drive disk memory and 60MB of RAM. By the dead end of the 90s, I witnessed the last years of Web 1.0, visiting various fan sites covering interests of mine that I had no other means outside of Club Nintendo to read about, interacting on video game forums of the time, revisiting favorite NES games like the first 6 Mega Man games through emulation, using the very early versions of MSN Messenger before it even had display pictures. Hell, remember ICQ? 1999 is a really big year for pop culture here. Pokemania hits Mexico big time too, a Game Boy with Pokemon Red or Blue becomes a much coveted item, the anime airs with humongous immediate success, multiple promotions through soda brand Mirinda, Tazos through Sabritas, Frito-Lay's Mexican branch. But not only Pokemon, the Powerpuff Girls also hit the scene and the anime-esque action and the angular UPA inspired art made a runaway success. There was also Ocarina of Time's immediate success through Nintendo Mania's Shilling. All these things became pop culture icons of the time. In the first half of the 90s, in some neighborhoods you'd see Dragon Ball, Ranma and Saint Seiya graffiti. In the late 90s you'd see Powerpuff Girls, Pikachu graffiti and maybe a Triforce every now and then. Nintendo commercials narrated by Piccolo's dub actor Carlos II became a pop culture icon for us gamers of the time as well.
No sentirás temor. No fracasarás. No dormirás. No harás sufrir. Bueno, tal vez. ¿Estás listo para el reto?
As a side note, around this time I got an N64 with Donkey Kong 64 and Ocarina of Time, the latter which became one of my favorite games of all time. So a ton of my time online revolved around looking for news about Zelda Gaiden, which became Majora's Mask. Sadly, around this time Nintendo Mania ended. But it sort of lived on for a bit on cable TV, let me explain. Around this time I also loved every Friday watching Cartoon Fridays. I'm sure everyone my age both in Mexico and the US will remember this blog and its hosts fondly, right? Well, during the late N64 years and early GameCube days, we had this monthly program hosted by Dexter after Cartoon Fridays, showcasing various Nintendo video games. It was just a few minutes long, unlike Nintendo Mania, but if I learned anything, I learned how to get Epona from these segments. The IFE was completely formed as an institution by the year 2000 elections. After all the chaos I've told you about, the elections of that year were a game changer, and for the first time, the PRI wasn't the ruling party anymore. Power went to Vicente Fox of the PAN party. Although he's kind of divisive nowadays, his term was one of economical stability for a change. The peso-dollar exchange through that entire term was really stable, products were affordable, and for once everything was looking fine. And despite all the hardships and unrest, my childhood ended and adolescence began on a sweeter note. Good things don't last forever, however, and who knows what the future will bring us, but we better not forget the time of a broken economy and pop culture madness as we once again go through another strange time of a broken economy and pop culture madness, with a vengeance. Thank you so much for watching this little remembrance of this harsh decade. I hope it was insightful or entertaining. I know it wasn't exactly an upbeat video, but I'd say growing up like this shaped up who I am and my interests. I know I skimmed over some pop culture details, but if anyone's interested, I could make another video exclusively about anime in Mexico and Latin America in the 90s and 2000s. I'm sure by now everybody knows about Mexico's insane love for Dragon Ball, Gohan Blanco y el Grande Padre. But boy, were there many other Japanese shows that were pretty popular. Until next time, see ya!